I've been thinking about it. I think the church is pretty awesome the way it is. I guess we won't make any changes while the boss is gone. This is an awesome church. I'm so glad to be a part of it. Rolling up my sleeves. Look out, that's right. We're going to talk about marriage today, but this is more than just marriage. This is relationships. And much of what I'm going to share today pertains to everyone in this room, whether you're married or not, whether you have been married and that failed, whether you're hoping to be married someday, this is for you. Yesterday morning was one of those mornings that tries a marriage. Jim got in late from Fight Club, right? Fight Club guys, you guys were out late. And it was good. I had to get up early. So already you can see where this is not good. I had to get to Indianapolis. And I was trying to get ready. I needed to leave the house by 6:30. And at 6:25, I'm putting the finishing touches on my coffee, and the dog starts to vomit. And multiple places in the kitchen. And my daughter was calling. She had a fever, and she wasn't sure what to do. And the skylight was leaking, and I had to go. So I called Jim out of bed and said, "There's several areas of vomit. Not mine. Please check in with my daughter at some point today, and the mop is in the back hall." Marriage can be tough, and I'm no expert. But I'm excited to do this series and talk about relationships and talk about marriage. It's a subject that's really near and dear to my heart because 25 years ago, I had a failed marriage. And recovering from that, recovering spiritually, recovering emotionally, was brutal. And I don't want anyone to go through that. And sadly, many people do. This is what the Bible has to say about divorce. In Malachi 2:16, this is from the Message. "I hate divorce," says the God of Israel. God of the angel armies says, "I hate the violent dismembering of the one flesh of marriage. So watch yourselves. Don't let your guard down. Don't cheat." That message is so clear, isn't it? That wording is so strong. God hates divorce, but he does not hate divorced people. He loves divorced people. He loves all people. There can be redemption. There can be forgiveness. There can be restoration because we serve an incredible, powerful God. And there's always hope for the marriage, regardless of the offense. The question is rather whether or not there's hardness of heart, that continual unwillingness to repent and change and be healed, and that continual unwillingness to forgive and move on. It's really hardness of heart above everything else that destroys a marriage. I wish we spent more time talking about relationships and marriage and how to make them stronger. Even if you enjoy a great marriage, it can be even greater. And this week, next Sunday morning and next Sunday night, we are going to really dive deep into how to protect our marriages, how to strengthen our marriages, how to enjoy our marriages. So again, I want to urge you to consider coming, especially next Sunday evening. You know, you could spend years reading all the marriage material that's out there, all the material on relationships. You could go anywhere. You could go to the library. You could go to Pinterest. You could go to Instagram. You could go to Facebook. You can find lots of great marriage advice. And I found some, and I want to share that with you. How to decide who to marry. You've got to find somebody who likes the same stuff. If you like sports, she should like it that you like sports, and she should keep the chips and dip coming. And that's Alan, age 10. And I love that Alan doesn't say she should also like sports. No. She should just like it that you like sports and keep the snacks coming. Why does love happen between two particular people? May, age 9, says this. No one is really sure why it happens, but I heard it has something to do with how you smell. That's why deodorant and perfume are so popular. Ryan, age 8, says, "You're supposed to get shot with an arrow, but I think after that, it's not really supposed to hurt." How to tell if two people are married. Married people usually look the most happy when they are talking to other people. That was Eddie, age 6. How to stay married. This is good. How to stay married. One of you better know how to write a check, because even if you have tons of love, there are still going to be bills to pay. And this wise girl, Ava, was only 8. Don't do things like wear smelly green sneakers. You might get attention, but attention is not the same thing as love. That was Alonzo, age 9. Just a couple more. How do you make love last? And don't we all want to know that? How do we make love last? Derek, age 8, says, wisely, I love this one. Don't forget your wife's name. That will really mess things up. Natalie, age 9, says, don't say that you love somebody and then change your mind, because that's not nice. And Ricky, age 7, sums it up nicely. Spend most of your time trying hard to love each other. That's really what you should do. So some of these are super funny, right? But some of them are rather poignant. And the ones that stood out to me as truly thought-provoking, number 1, attention is not the same thing as love. And number 2, don't say that you love somebody and then change your mind. That is not nice. And number 3, spend most of your time loving each other. Sadly, the divorce rate is high, and it doesn't really make a huge difference whether you are a church family or a non-church family. And these are the statistics I found. This is my second marriage. Jim and I will celebrate 23 years next month. But you can see that for me, second marriage, I have even a greater risk of divorce than a first-time person. And I brought 2 children into the marriage. And so statistically speaking, our marriage should have dissolved in the first 5 years. Statistics. They're kind of sobering, aren't they? I told a handful of people that I was giving this 2-week series and that Chris is going to add a 3rd week on at the end. And I asked for some ideas. What do you want to hear about? I mean, there's an awful lot we could talk about. So what do you want to hear about? And some people made some suggestions, but I wanted to share with you some of the suggestions that I received. How to survive in a loveless marriage. How to survive a cheating spouse. How to not be lonely in your marriage. How to love someone who doesn't love you like you hoped to be loved. How to keep going when your spouse stops cherishing you and just gives out commands like fix dinner, keep the house clean, take care of the kids, go to work. That's a sad list. And to me, it underscored the importance of talking about relationships. It underscores the importance of taking time to talk about marriage. These people were asking me how to survive, not how to thrive. And God's hope, God's desire, is that each of us can thrive in our relationships, that it's wonderful, but it's work. Have you ever played on a team? Have you ever been part of a team? How did that work if there was a ball hog on the team? How did that work if there was a slacker on the team? How did it work if there was a know-it-all on the team? Being a good teammate and having a good teammate can take a mediocre team to great. And one of the best pieces of advice that anyone ever gave me when I was getting married to Jim was to think of myself and Jim as a team. So I am on Team Evans. It's a good team. God's our coach. And when I look at Jim as my teammate and I think about the importance of the team concept, it really helps me to approach my marriage in a whole different way. When I think of God as my coach and the Bible as my playbook, it helps me to know I don't have to do this hard marriage stuff alone. One of the most fun sporting events I ever attended with my children was my daughter Natalie's 8th grade Big 11 volleyball tournament. And if you're in 8th grade, you know this is big stuff. This is like the Olympics, really. It's right up there with the Olympics. And we drew a tough draw. We drew the crosstown rival who had not just beaten us during the season, but they kind of obliterated us on the court. And so we were a little down to think that was our first match. The other team was stronger, they were taller, they were more experienced, they had more depth on their team, they had more girls playing club ball, they had a coach who knew the game. So on paper, the obvious choice was that the other team would once again win. The teams came out on the floor, and our team won the first game. Hopes were high. Cheering was loud. We squeaked by, but we won it. Now the coaches for the other team circled their team together and wrote lots of things down on their clipboard, and the other team came out and they wiped the floor with our team that second game. Now it would go to a tiebreaker, that third game. And this is what I noticed sitting in the stands with my hands sweaty because, this was the Olympics. This was our Olympics. The other team was celebrating. The music was playing. Some of the girls were dancing. Some of the girls came over and gave their parents high fives in the stands. The coaches were looking at their clipboards, but they were mostly talking to each other. And I have to be honest and say it really, really irritated me that these girls were already celebrating when there was still a game to be played. Then I looked over at our team. Our team didn't have the height, the depth, the experience. Our team had a coach who knew the game. And not only that, we had a team whose coach knew the players. She had worked hard to build a relationship with the players, not just on the court, but off of the court too. And as I watched the difference between what was happening on these two benches, our players were huddled with their arms around each other, totally focused on the coach. Their eyes were laser focused on the coach, and I could see their heads shaking like this. Yes, yes, yes. And we came out and we won that third game. We weren't the better team. We had a coach who knew the players. And the teammates were excellent. If someone missed a serve, they would say, hey, you'll get the next one. If somebody dropped a ball, it's all right, we'll help you get the next one. They encouraged each other. They spoke positively. And it was shocking that they won that match, and thrilling. The other coach wasn't too happy. The other team wasn't too happy. But that's the difference. Our girls stayed focused on each other, and they stayed focused on their coach. And even though they weren't the better team, and even though statistically on paper, this is my second marriage and it shouldn't have lasted for 5 years, miraculous things can happen. What makes a teammate really great? Well, a great teammate develops relationships with their other teammates. Gary Chapman's book, The 5 Love Languages, is a great place to start. If you haven't read it, pick it up. If you've read it, pick it up again. We have basically 5 love languages: quality time, physical touch, giving gifts, words of affirmation, and acts of service. And we tend to gravitate toward 1 or 2 of those, and that's what we like. And because we like those things, we assume everybody else likes those things too. And so that's how we speak to other people, through our words and actions. And here's what happens at my house. I am married to a wonderful man, and his love language is not the same as mine. His is acts of service. And so he might come in on a Saturday afternoon after having been outside for hours, and he will say to me a little triumphantly, "I put air in your tires." swept out the garage. You won't be tracking that dirt in the house anymore. And you have new wiper blades. And I think Jim thinks that I'm going to go, wow! And instead I say, thank you. Didn't even know I needed new wiper blades. Because my love language is not acts of service. My love language is quality time and physical touch. So what I really need is for him to look me in the eye and have conversation and hold my hand. And that's tough for him sometimes, but he tries. Understanding your love language is so important. So important. A great teammate is willing to play any role on the team. Being willing to step up and fill the role that's needed is what makes a good team strong. Players who have that team-first mentality, that attitude, they're willing to sacrifice their personal goals for the sake of the team. It should always be we ahead of me. And in an effort to be totally transparent with you this morning, this is something I struggle with. What's best for me is not always what's best for my team, and sometimes I can forget that. I have my own agenda, or I remember it and I just choose to ignore it because I have my own agenda. And when that happens, my team suffers. 1 Corinthians 12, 17 through 20 says, if the whole body were an eye, where would the sense of hearing be? If the whole body were an ear, where would the sense of smell be? But in fact, God has placed the parts in the body, every single one of them, just as he wanted them to be. If they were all one part, where would the body be? We all have a role to play. We all have a job to do. But we have to be willing to step in and fill in those gaps when there's a gap on our team. The best teams do not have people with the same skills. They combine diverse talents and appreciate the gifts that each one brings to contribute. Great teams have people who know how to play their role and appreciate their teammates, but they're willing to step out of their comfort zone and do something different when it's needed. A great teammate always gives maximum effort. Every player has to give 100% during practices and games. If your team's down by 20 in the fourth quarter, you still have to give maximum effort. If your practice is scheduled for 6 a.m. and you are not a morning person, you still have to give maximum effort. If your teammate's a slacker, you still have to give maximum effort. And I think that's a tough one because our mindset is, well, if they're not trying, I'm not going to either. We have to give 100%. There's no excuse to ever give less than your best. If you do, you're risking the outcome for your team. Galatians 6:9 says, let's not get tired of doing what's good, for at the right time we will reap the harvest if we don't give up. And that was not written in talking about marriage, but it certainly applies to our marriages. A great teammate works hard to improve their game. The guy on the team who has a 92% free throw shooting average is probably the guy who stays after practice and shoots 100 free throws before he goes home. When other teammates see you working hard on your game, maybe that'll inspire them to work hard on their game too. And who benefits? The team. The team benefits. Matthew 5:41 says, if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, what should you do? Go 2. Sometimes I get focused on how Jim should improve his game. Does that ever happen to you? Have you ever played on a team where a teammate is constantly telling you what to do? They're bossy, they're obnoxious, they're overbearing, they're loud. I can do that. I can excel at that. I've even given Jim some pointers regarding what he might do to make things better, and that's not necessarily wrong if it's done constructively, but it can sure get annoying in a hurry. And I really should focus on my game. A great teammate spends time studying the opponent. Every team has an opponent. Scouting the opponent, knowing what the opponent's plays, knowing what to expect from the opponent makes the likelihood of success for your team even higher. You can't just hope that you can handle whatever happens. You can't just wing it in your relationships and in your marriage. You have to be prepared. And we have an enemy. Sometimes we can look at our spouse as the enemy. Has that ever happened to you? We can look at our boss as the enemy. We can look at our family member, our neighbor, as the enemy, but that's not who our enemy is. We have an enemy, and our enemy hopes that we underestimate him. He hopes that we downplay what he's capable of doing. And Satan loves it when we get confused about who he is. And when we think he isn't really much of a factor, we let our guard down. Things can happen that injure your marriage. 1 Peter 5:8 tells us to be sober and vigilant because your adversary, the devil, walks around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. I wish that Satan would just show up at my front door with that red devil suit like we see at Halloween and the pitchfork. Wouldn't that be nice? I'd recognize him right away. And he'd ring the bell and I would answer and he'd say, "Hey, I'm Satan. I'm here to wreak havoc on your finances, your family, your self-esteem, your feelings of self-worth. Let's get started." And what would we do? We would slam the door, deadbolt the door, and call 911, right? I mean, we would never tolerate that. We would never tolerate that. And if Satan were that obvious, it would be much easier. But that's not how it works. It's important to know that Satan is never content with just stirring the pot a little bit. That's not enough for him. Satan wants to diminish your love and derail your relationships. He wants to cast doubt. He seizes every opportunity to make you feel discouraged, devalued, discontent, disheartened, distanced, disillusioned, and disappointed. He wants us to disengage from ourselves, from our spouse, and especially from our coach. He doesn't just want to divide your family, he wants to destroy your family. And what better way to do that than to attack your marriage? He whispers lies into our ears, and we sometimes think of those lies as truth. But they're not. They're lies. Maybe they sound like this: "He'd rather be out with one of the guys and not at home with you. You are clearly not his priority. She said she would get a job once the kids were all in school, and she still is not bringing home a paycheck. She's not really contributing to this family. He sure spends a lot of time at work. I bet he's found someone there that's caught his eye. She spends way too much time with her girlfriends and not nearly enough time taking care of you." What lies does Satan whisper into your ear? It's important to recognize those. Do not underestimate your enemy, and don't take your eyes off your coach. A great teammate always leads by example and encourages. And this isn't always leading with words. Sometimes it's leading with actions, encouraging the other teammate, staying positive, being focused, especially listening and spending time with the coach. Hebrews 10:24-25 says, "And let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another." What can we do differently with our words? What can you do differently with your words and your actions at home this week? A great teammate understands the importance of good communication. And this verse came from Shane, who posted it yesterday. And so I just tucked it in here this morning. Thanks, Shane, for that. 1 Peter 1:19 says, "My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry." That's a great verse. I should probably post that one so I see it first thing every day. Spend time understanding the other person, their likes, their dislikes, their insecurities. What do they need in order to feel loved? Stephen Covey wrote a book called The 7 Habits of Highly Successful, Effective People, and Jim loves that book. I have not read that book, but I think I've heard it because Jim has quoted, I think, every bit of that book to me. And while it's not a marriage book, it sure could be. because a lot of those principles in there that make you a strong business person also make you a strong teammate in your marriage. Principle number 5. This is the one that Jim is so good at, and it's really made all the difference for us in how we communicate. Seek first to understand. That sounds so simple, doesn't it? Seek first to understand. Communication is the most important skill in our lives, and we spend years learning how to read and write, and we spend a long time developing our speech. But what about listening? What training have you had to be a good listener? I haven't had nearly enough. If you're like most people, you probably seek first to be understood rather than to understand the other person. You want to get your point across. And in doing so, you might ignore the other person completely. You might not let them finish their sentence. You might pretend that you're listening when you're really not. You're thinking about how you're going to answer and what your response will be. Most people listen with the intent to reply, not the intent to understand. And those are two very different things. It's easy for us to listen to the person who's talking and start filtering what they're saying through our own life experiences and think we have all the answers. And we sometimes decide prematurely what the other person is thinking or trying to express. For example, this is what Jim would do. If I said I was struggling, he would ask me questions about that. Why are you struggling? When did you notice this? How do you feel when you're struggling? It's like he's been to a counseling course. But what he wouldn't say is, well, I don't know why you're struggling. We have a nice house. We have great kids. You love your job at the church. He wouldn't say that. He would not invalidate my feelings. He would seek to understand how I'm feeling and why I'm feeling that way. And that's a really special way to communicate. We haven't always been great communicators, though. The first few months we were married, and we are able to laugh about this now, which is good. I pointed out to Jim that the trash was full. Ladies, what does that mean? Take out the trash, right? Yeah. And he said, well, yeah, it is. The next morning, we were in the kitchen getting ready for our day, and I said to Jim, the trash is starting to smell. Ladies, what does that mean? Take out the trash. And Jim said, yeah, I smell it too. And he went to work. And that night, I was still irritated about it, and I said, I finally took out the trash. I've asked you twice to take out the trash, and you didn't do it. And he said, whoa, you never asked me to take out the trash. You said it was full, and I agreed with you. And you said it smelled, and I told you I smelled it too, so you wouldn't think you were going crazy. I've learned to be very direct in my communication. And he's also learned to read between the lines. And that's made for better communication at our house. It's good when we can laugh at ourselves, isn't it? A sense of humor is important for a good teammate, too. A great teammate understands their own strengths and weaknesses, and this is crucial because knowing your strengths and using those is key, but even more important is knowing your weaknesses, knowing where you need help, acknowledging those and being willing to work on those, to guard against those. I don't really always need somebody to tell me I'm doing a great job, but if your love language is words of affirmation, then that is something that you do crave. What I need in my life is somebody who knows my weaknesses and can help me with those. I need that person to whisper in my ear sometimes that I should not be so controlling and remind me that God is my coach. Not to worry so much, because God's a promise maker and a promise keeper. To let God be God, to let him do his thing. It's so tempting for me to go to prayer with a list of things that I would like my spouse to do differently. Dear God, can you please change the following? And could you do it by Tuesday afternoon? Change him, work on him, make him understand. Instead, I need to take my weaknesses to prayer, and I need to ask God to help me, not to change my spouse. A great teammate has positive and energetic attitude and may glance back, but doesn't keep their eyes fixed on what's behind. A good teammate doesn't dwell on what happened earlier. Few things are as detrimental to a team as negativity. If you made a mistake earlier in the game, learn from it and move on. If your spouse made a mistake, extend grace and forgive. I make that sound easy, and it's not. Some hurts are small, but some are monumental. And extending grace and forgiveness might be the hardest thing that you have ever had to do. I can't do that without God's help. I have to ask him to help me. If you hang on to bitterness and anger and resentment, you are risking the outcome for your team. The relationship cannot heal or survive, and it certainly cannot thrive when bitterness, anger, and resentment are what we choose to hold on to. Luke 9:62 says, Jesus is saying, "No one puts his hand to the plow and then looks back. If they do that, they're not fit for the kingdom of God." What happens when we put our hand to the plow and we look behind us? Our rows aren't straight. We can't plant all that we need to plant. We're impacting the harvest negatively. It's okay to learn from those mistakes, but it's super important to move on. A great teammate holds self and others accountable. When you sign up to join a team, it's crucial that you understand the level of commitment. You are committed to attending practices. You're committed to attending the games. You commit to practice outside of the practice to work on your game. You commit to watching game film. You commit to memorizing the playbook. Joe Dumars played for the Detroit Pistons for many years, a great NBA player, and he says, good teams, those are teams where coaches hold players accountable. But great teams, those are teams where players hold players accountable. Commitment is such a great word, isn't it? Allegiance, loyalty, faithfulness, fidelity. To understand a marriage commitment, you have to think about the difference between a covenant and a contract. A contract is something that's for a limited time. We hear of athletes who sign contracts, right? And then their contracts are up, and then they're in contract negotiations, and their coaches and owners are trying to decide if they want to re-sign those players. Contracts deal with specific actions. You got to show up on time and produce a certain product. Contracts have an if-then mentality. If you provide something, then you're meeting the requirement of the contract, and then you can keep going. If you make your car payment on time, you can keep driving your car. If you don't make your car payment, your car will be taken away from you. Contracts are self-serving. But covenants have an entirely different feel. And a covenant marriage, that's the marriage that God wants for each of us. A covenant is initiated for the benefit of the other person. God made a covenant with us. He didn't need us. He wanted us. He sent his son to die for us so that we could reach God. We could have that gap bridged that we could never bridge on our own. That was for our benefit. A covenant is unconditional. In your marriage vows, you don't say, I take you in sickness and in health unless you get too sick, because that's just a little gross. You don't say in richer and poorer unless the poor part's too poor, because who wants to live poor? A covenant is permanent. In your marriage vows, you don't say, I will take you until death do us part, unless someone better comes along. Covenant marriage, that's God's plan for marriage. Initiated for the benefit of the other person, unconditional and permanent. A great teammate does so many other things, don't they? There's not time to list all of them. They're willing to accept feedback and make necessary changes. That verse from Proverbs 27, as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. Hopefully your spouse makes you a better person. Hopefully you make your spouse a better person. A great teammate supports others when they're struggling and doesn't blame or find fault. Injuries occur. We all have an off day. Sometimes we have an off season. But we win and lose as a team. Ecclesiastes 4, 9, and 10. 2 are better than 1 because they have a good return for their labor. If one of them falls down, the other one can help him up. A great teammate is reliable, respectful, honest, trustworthy, and I think loving. If our goal as a married couple is to cross the finish line together, then we have to be the best teammate we can be. We have to remember that we are a team. And there are days when that's easy, and there are days when that's hard. Sometimes the things that were endearing when we were dating are the things that drive us nuts once we're married. And so it's important to choose your spouse every day. Choose each day to try to bring your best to that marriage. So when you say, I do, you're really saying, I will. I will love you every day, even on the days I don't like you very much. I will think less about me and more about we. I'll laugh with you, not at you. I'll support you, respect you. I'll stand by you. Marriage is not a noun. Marriage is a verb. It's action, it's work, it's effort. It's worth it. A marriage or a relationship is not something that you get. It's something that you do. It's the way you love your partner every day. And if you're struggling with your partner, then each morning I would encourage you to say something like this. Even though my spouse is driving me a little bit crazy, even though he can get it wrong, or she, and can be whatever, fill in that blank, self-absorbed, self-serving, selfish, whatever that word is, I want him. I choose him. I commit to loving him fully, and I commit to keeping my eyes on my coach to direct my paths and my heart and to guard my words. I don't love my spouse because of how he performs or what he provides. I love him for who he is. I don't need him. I want him. And I choose this day to have my actions reflect that. I choose to be the best teammate that I can be in an effort to cross the finish line together. I choose to love. I choose to love. Next week, we're going to talk about the Samaritan woman at the well, and we're going to look at Ephesians 5. But in the meantime, there are some tips for you. Number one, and most important, spend time with your coach this week. God should always be your number one, and your spouse should always be your number two. Ask God to show you ways to strengthen your marriage and your relationships. And when you pray this week, go to God with a list of your spouse's great attributes and give thanks for those. Really focus on those. And go to God with a list of your weaknesses and ask for help with those. Instead of striving to be right, strive to do what's right. And those can be two very different things at times. Practice listening. Seek first to understand. Each morning, remind yourself that you chose this person long ago and you still choose them today, and be intentional about that. Think about what your love language is and what your spouse's love language is, and how does that change how you interact with your partner. And I'll finish reminding you of the sage advice from children. Call your spouse by their right name. Wear deodorant. Remember that giving your spouse attention is not the same thing as giving your spouse love. And this week, spend most of your time loving the other person. Let's close with prayer. God, thanks so much for this time and this place and this opportunity to talk about marriage and how you intend marriage to be. And it is so hard at times. And if I had to do it on my own, God, I know I would be another statistic. I'm so grateful that you're my coach. I'm grateful that you're willing to coach everyone in this room and beyond. And I would just ask that we would take the opportunity this week to spend time with you, God, and that you would hear us when we talk with you. That you would comfort us if we're in a marriage where we're just trying to survive, that you would lead us toward thriving in our marriages and in our relationships. Help us to look at our spouse the way you look at our spouse. Give us your eyes. Thanks for loving us. Thanks for teaching us how to love. And please help us to love others just as you would want us to. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. If you are in need of prayer, there's a prayer team over here that would love to pray with you. Thanks so much for being here. You have your assignment I'll look forward to seeing you next Sunday. Have a great week.